So typically it begins with that temporary kind of redness that is with the cheeks, and people might notice the season or temperature changes, things like that, like extreme hot, extreme cold, spicy foods.
Welcome to this week's episode of Beauty Babble. Today, we're talking about the signs of rosacea and how you can help. Hi, Suzanne. How are you today?
Doing fantastic, Doreen. How are you?
I'm doing good. You brought this topic forward about rosacea. And after I got over the struggle of spelling it, we decided, okay, let's do it. So I guess we can just kick it off just simply like what is rosacea? Like define it for our listeners who wouldn't know or aren't familiar.
Sure. So rosacea is basically a chronic neurovascular skin condition. So it causes that redness to appear typically in the cheeks and in the chin area, sometimes into the nose, but typically that's where it starts. And you sometimes will see a little bit of swelling or edema in the skin as well, depending what stage it is. It can be in other places like scalp, neck, ears, chest, back, but typically, and even the eyes in the eye area. But I think in our treatment room, we typically see it on the cheeks where it starts, and sometimes on the chin area. So they're people who tend to flush easily. That they it looks like a consistent blush, like they're embarrassed by something almost, but it just doesn't go away depending on what stage they're in.
Is it okay? So you talked about stages because it can look differently, right? Like in my mind, when I think of rosacea, I think I pull out that picture maybe from a textbook with the enlarged nose, but that's not necessarily what it always looks like, especially in the beginning stages.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, no, so typically it begins with that temporary kind of redness that is with the cheeks, and people might notice times of the season or temperature changes, things like that, like extreme hot, extreme cold, spicy foods. So if you think of a lot of facial technicians out there will remember their aesthetics training in facials where they talked about the broken capillaries and they have this kind of redness. So we know, don't let the shower hit your face, stay away from spicy foods. Alcohol is another one. So it's almost like that beginning stage, but what they're discovering now, well, not now, it's been a few years, but I think we're getting more attention about rosacea is that it will move into the next stages, and it just keeps progressively getting worse if we don't get control of it and start to
mhm.
monitor it. So as I mentioned, through diet, there's a few things to think about. So your stage one, think of that kind of pre-step to rosacea. It's kind of that borderline. And again, we're not doctors, right? So we're not diagnosing here. So don't tell them you have rosacea. You can say it kind of looks like rosacea to me, but you should go see a dermatologist and get a proper diagnosis. And then look at firstly, ask them, is there anything genetically? Like, is there anyone in your family that you notice that constantly has that redness in their cheeks or worse, right? Like maybe there's a grandpa, a great uncle, things like that. That typically with men, you'll see how you talked about the nose, the rhino, what is it called again? I'm trying to think of it. Rhinophyma. And that's in the nose. So that's at that last stage, stage four. But so stage one, that redness, comes and goes, but more often is coming than not. Like this is not a once a month thing. They're noticing it more often. That's when I'd start to be looking at what to do about that. We'll get into each one. So that
How
dry skin, flushing kind of thing, stage one. Stage two, you're going to start to
Wait, wait,
see.
wait, before you move into stage 2, when
Mhm.
you're in stage 1, I'm just curious, like, when a client comes in with
Sure.
stage 1 rosacea, how do you think they would, like, explain their skin? Because they probably don't know what's happening, right? Are they gonna start sharing that, they're starting to get more red, or are they feeling more sensitive? Like, how do you think that they would their symptoms without knowing, like, that they're sharing symptoms of rosacea?
Oh, that's just how my skin is typically
Okay.
what they say,
So
right?
it's
So
always been like that?
I personally, that's usually what I've encountered.
Okay.
And it's still kind of happening. I meet people to this day that say, "Well, I just kind of read all the time." It's like,
Mm.
Yes, I can see that because they are like little rosy cheeks, looks like they have blush on all the time, right?
Right.
It's usually in the circular little area.
Okay, okay. So is it more
So why
are
don't
they more sensitive?
yeah, they're more aware because their cheeks will get hot,
Okay.
right? So they're usually typically they'll complain about the heat that starts to develop because they're not usually taking care of it. So let's
Mm,
talk about the stage one then. So when a client comes in, that flushing and redness, so we want to bring down that vascular fast response that's happening. So their vessels, their cupros, the capillaries in their skin are expanding. And typically, what happens when they expand, they're tiny, tiny, and very fragile on their lining, if you wish, of the vessels.
mhm,
It can break easy. And that's where the cupros comes into play. It looks like, a crack in a windshield. And all of a sudden, if you extreme heat, cold, any pressures, things like that, it will then expand out. So that's kind of like what happens when they get into stage two. But stage one, when you look at it, it's just kind of a redness, like a vascular response. Like someone's lying in your treatment room, they have no rosiness. And then as you start doing exfoliation and massage and all these things, they start to get a little rosy. But then at the end of the treatment, it's calmed down and back to normal. Whereas these people will tend to keep red. They stay a
mm,
little more red, if that makes sense.
yeah,
So, speaking of that, usually there's dryness involved in the skin. So, it's becoming reactive, itchy. Your skin is just responding to that because it wants to heal what's going on,
mhm,
right? That's the vascular response, typically why it's doing that, other than triggers. So what are the triggers? There's a lot of things that can do it. So if you think as a facial technician, why would cupros happen? So it's no different than that first stage. So the heat, extreme temperature changes is what we'll say. Shower hitting your face is too aggressive on that. So a lot of people love that feeling. I tell them if you love the warm water or too hot of water, right? To turn their heads to the shower and let it run down the face if it's not too hot, but try not to let that
okay,
hit the face. Alcohol, spicy foods, again, and then look at the genetic side. So ask on yourself in that consultation, does this run in the family? Do you know anyone that has this kind of redness to their face all the time? And typically they're going to say yes. But nowadays I find it's no. So
mhm,
what's going on with them? So there's the last few years it's been on that, well, you can hear about the microbiome and all, probiotics in skincare, and it's helping with
mm,
rosacea. So if you start putting that puzzle together, you start to understand a bit more what's going on, which is coming to the other stages. So stage one, I'd be looking at for sensitivity, bring down the vascular response to the skin, something soothing and cooling and calming to the skin. You can kind of treat it like a sensitive skin line. That's typically what that line's going to be designed for. But reach out to your distributor and ask the questions, so they probably can help you target a little bit more, so you can help. But again, I would be telling them if this persists, like if you don't take care of this now, the chances of you moving to stage two are greater because there's only so much that the vascular response can, it's kind of like a flush, so it's going to open up the veins, right?
mhm,
But then you need to calm that back down. When you constantly are opening the veins and go, and you're not allowing that retraction to happen, I guess you could say,
mhm,
then eventually it's just going to burst. And that's where the telangiectasia, the broken capillary, comes into play. So now you have small, tiny broken vessels. Now, that can be from blowing your nose, right? That can be improper extractions, whether it's the person doing it themselves or maybe someone else did it.
mhm,
So there's a lot of factors to what could be creating that. But that redness is now typically more involved. So you can actually, if you look, you can either see it with your eyes or definitely see it with your magnifying lamp as well. So on that one, again, it's no different. You want to start treating that area, try to calm it down, find out what's triggering it. Like, is there, do they work outside? Do they love skiing? Are they in the sun all the time? Are they sun worshippers? Tanning beds count, right? So remember that one. But I think if you still remind them that you can control this, you've been given the answer from your doctor. So now let's make sure it doesn't go to those next stages. Because once it's higher up, it's very hard to keep control of it and it goes out of hand. So again,
and I
I
think
think,
it's
sorry,
important to note, like, there's no cure for
yep,
rosacea, it's just really about treating it, right? So,
yeah,
mitigating that going through those stages at a rapid pace, like slowing down, or, maybe you don't get to stage 4 if you're have proper care and treatment for your skin.
Yeah,
Does that
especially if you
sound
know
fair?
it's genetic. Especially
Yeah,
if you know it's genetic, right? And I mean, environmentally, we know environmentally toxins out there, the stresses of life, like there's a lot of internal and external things that are happening to us, I think more so than before. And that's also triggering because some people who doesn't, they don't even have rosacea in their family. It kind of used to be like a genetic thing, inherited, like my auntie has it, my grandma, my mother, my whoever, it's kind of runs in the family. But now it's like it doesn't run in the family and it's just
yeah,
happening to people. And there's also the hormone changes which act in the body itself. If you've taken, if a person has taken any human anatomy and understand how that correlates with the endocrine system, there's a whole other factor involved, and that's why you need to know from a doctor, right? Like find out what's really going on with it if you can
yeah,
get that, and then try to help slow down what potentially could be happening to the point of controlling it. I mean,
yeah.
you can do it if you catch it early enough. You can keep it at bay, but it's an effort, right? It's like, you've lost weight and you want to, I use that analogy often, and you want to keep it off. So now you need to do effort
Mhm.
in a way of life and lifestyle. So it's the same idea with your skin. A stage 3 becomes permanent, right? It becomes deeper and definitely more permanent issue.
Yeah.
This condition becomes usually the bumpiness you'll start to notice and the swelling in by the fold of the nose and the cheek area.
Mm.
And when it starts to change structurally to the skin, that's a problem because that cannot change once you've structurally changed it. Again, maybe the doctors can do something differently. That's out of our scope, though. We,
Yeah.
as ourselves, can't do that. Like
Can't
people
treat
say,
it
well,
at
can
that
you do
point.
peels and things like that? It's like, well, how much stimulation do you want to do? And is it the right thing? And what's going on? What if they're having a trigger, right? So you don't want to be the trigger behind what's going on, I think is another thing. So knowing your product line will be really important and what's in your products so you know how to treat them before you go ahead and do it. But
I
stage
think
3 is going to get mistaken sometimes as acne,
mm,
right? It's a type of breakout on the skin, but it's not quite acne. It looks different.
mhm.
And if you're
Yeah.
not certain, listeners, just Google it. Look at pictures. You're going to see a little bit of a difference. So be mindful. And I think that's where we start to look at peels, right? Because we think acne. It's like,
Mhm.
rosacea is different though. You're not going to be treating it in that same way. It's definitely way more reactive in stage 3. You're going to have way more trigger response faster and easier. And you don't want to be that person.
And
Uh,
asking questions too, like, what was your skin like before? Because they've gone through stage 1 and 2, right? And in
right.
thinking about the different stages, it's good to know and it's good to share that with your clients because, like you were talking about effort, sometimes the things that take effort, we don't really want to do them all the time. But
Yes.
if you know it's going to get worse and you can do something to stop it from getting any worse, it would give you a little bit more motivation. So I think even just educating your client on what could happen potentially if it is rosacea after they've gone to a doctor.
Yeah.
You're covering all your bases. If it is,
Right.
this is where it could go. So maybe you want to stop it now. So just kind of going
Mhm.
through that explanation a little bit.
Well, and I think it's important to have the diagnosis so you know what to do. So, if someone came to your treatment room with stage 3, been diagnosed with rosacea, you know what you're treating now. So,
Yeah.
you need to do something calming. You want to take that edema out of the skin, the swelling that's happening. Because of the little breakouts, you're going to treat it almost like an acne. What's going to start healing? What's going to keep the bacteria at bay? So you do treat it almost that way, but we just don't want to get into the extreme peels and things like that because it's not acne. So what can you do? So there's lots of products out there that, the masks have, the antifungal, the antibacterial, or the serums do, or maybe it's the cleansers, but now you got to add in something for the sensitivity. So you're going to
Mhm.
be doing your mixology, right? Like mixing things not together, but your cleanser is going to be one thing, your mask might be another, your serum might be something else, right? So you're finding that customized formula to help with them. And I think that's where we need to look at. How do you start calming the skin down? Like LEDs can calm the skin and regenerate.
Mhm.
We talked about mushrooms the other day and how it heals. So, does any of your product have mushroom in it? So we know that it's going to start to heal and help the skin. And I've seen amazing results with people who really learn and dive into this treatment and understand. This is why we keep going at the fact you need to know your ingredients of your products so that you can go in and help. So this one's not going away. I think as a society, it's getting younger and younger. People starting with that stage one, stage two, later as they get a bit older, and I'm talking like 30, like I'm talking young, they're young, like teens to early 20s, having these stage one issues starting up
Wow.
and then moving on from there, right? So they're not going to know what to do and they're going to Google it. They're going to go to
Mhm.
retail places, and if they're misdiagnosed, it's an issue, right? Because like I said, I know someone who had stage 3 rosacea because they finally went and got it diagnosed, and someone was doing chemical peels on them. And I just like, you have to think, take a step back and really think, what are you doing and why are you doing it?
Mhm.
What's the reason behind? And I think sometimes that's when we get out of scope of practice or we forget about to do due diligence and ask those questions.
Yeah.
Like you said at the very beginning, what was it like a few years ago?
Mhm.
Find out the backstory on it,
Be
right?
curious.
Be curious, the whys. I think it's so important.
Absolutely.
You can definitely bring down that intensive burning that's happening in stage 3, I
Mhm.
think, that stinging. They become more reactive, so something very soothing and calming would be needed. And then if you add into that to help with the bacterial levels that are going on the skin as
Mhm.
well, and combine the two, I think you probably would have like some pretty good results for your clients. But again, I'd reach out to your distributor of where you're getting your products from, ask them more questions. Do they have, maybe they even have a treatment protocol in place for you.
Or rosacea, yeah.
You don't have to worry so much, right? So you
Mhm.
always want to have someone you can bounce off of, I think is really important. I love that when I had my place, my business operating, I always had a couple people I could, talk to because it just helps, right?
Mhm.
And then if clients are your doctors, right? A doctor is your client, like you could ask questions. I asked my doctor many a questions sometimes, and she was so nice to answer them because, I mean, who has time for that? They barely have
Yeah.
time to talk to you, right? But she did ask, I try one new question for her,
Yeah.
usually. She knew why I was doing it, and she thought that was great that I was trying to help clients a bit more. So then I felt like saying, no, you need to see a doctor now. Like you can't, I felt confident of when to tell them to do it, not just, oh, maybe you should,
Yeah.
more like, no, you need to now.
Yeah.
You need to go now. Book that appointment. So the next time we talk or next time I see you, you're going to come up with an answer, right? Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. And
Okay,
now
but there is also
right.
it can get worse because there's also a stage 4, isn't there?
Stage 4, yes. And this is where that the rhinophtema comes into play, where we kind of see it with the nose, where it
Mm.
becomes very changed in shape. It looks like it's getting larger. There's that, it's the sebaceous of the oil glands. So again, what's happening in stage 3, now you have sebaceous glands that are starting that acneic situation happening. So you want to keep that glue-like substance that's holding all those keratinized dead cells together. So you need to do that, like oil cleanses are a nice subtle way of just keeping that at bay so they don't have the buildup of dead skin, right? So if they start that, that should hold it off a little bit, and it's good for sensitivity. So you don't have to do a cleanser for oily skin. Maybe it's too aggressive, maybe it's too much, right? Unless you have a choice of a milk and a gel, that could be an option in there too. But
Yeah.
basically, the stage 4 is where it starts to change structurally. It's visibly noticeable. You see that the bump where I talked about in stage 3 by the nasolabia folds, right by the nose and the cheek, down towards the corner of the lips idea in that area, it starts to get thicker, bumpy looking, and it travels into the nose as well. And that's, again, like I said, it can happen around the eye area, but it's an inflammation that's very uncomfortable
Yeah.
typically. And it changes, and from that point, it's permanent. So they need to see a specialist. Like this becomes a specialist now. This is not a family doctor. This becomes into the dermatology
Mm.
level. And that's where I usually refer people is go see a dermatologist on this, because then they can at least dig deeper, find out genetics. They can do tests. They have everything in their hands to figure it out what's going on, right? But yeah, so unfortunately, stage 4, there's not much you can do. You might be able to take some of the swelling out of it, but structurally, visually, it changes
Mhm.
completely. So again, it's that, I guess, that area that enlarges drastically. So they don't know exactly the causes. They can't say it's this. It can be many things, like I mentioned before, hereditary, start with that. Environmental factors, like, I remember I had one of my clients, her husband started to come to me because he worked outside. He was always working outside. So you think of the extreme colds and the sun, right? And, he enjoyed his beers, and the foods and all that. So then, you dive into a little bit of, so we know it can be external, so environmental, we know it can be genetic, but also can be internal. So you want to maybe encourage them to look at their diet of what they're doing. So it's not a judgment, it's just helping them to see if they can figure out what triggered it. It
Mhm.
could be, oh, yeah, you know what? It's the sun. I don't have this issue as much in the winter. Oh, that's interesting facts, right? So I
Right.
think they start to understand, like in the winter, they're using, the face mask, baklava. What are those things? No, that's a dessert. What's
Yeah, that balaclava. But I'll take a baklava, please.
right? They could have that too. Oh, wait, might trigger. Just kidding. But they protect their skin, whereas in the summer they don't, right?
Yeah.
So what are some things that you notice? Like, what about the foods? Is there certain foods you're noticing that change it? So I think if they can maybe start encouraging them to write a diary
Yeah.
out of just noticing how stressed were they, so that they can figure, is this an internal trigger that's happening in doing this, or is it external? Is it both? Right? What are some things you can do when you notice the flare-ups? And when you
Mhm.
do, what's important is how long is it lasting? So when you put product on, or you're doing the things, from the treatment room, you said, oh, use this mask, 3 times a week, sunblock, and blah, 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 whatever you have prescribed them for home care, and they're noticing it's not helping. Well, you need to know that as a professional as
Right.
well, so that is there something different that needs to go on? So, but without them telling you why it happened or how that trigger was created,
Yeah,
then
what's making it worse?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think no matter what you do, so more engaged that
Yeah.
you are, it is a time consuming thing. It's not as simple as coming for treatment and they're gone. You
Mhm.
need to take that extra step if you do want to start helping people with rosacea. I think you need to go above and beyond the treatment room, if I can say it that way. So
Mm.
it helps them to understand a bit more, and what's their skin like at night, and what's their skin like in the morning. So how is that different? And maybe middle of the day, like, do they see a difference when they wake up in the morning? Are they less red?
Mhm.
Do they notice at night they're flared up completely? So even with that gentleman I'm referring to, he, come to think of it now, he also enjoyed a steam room. I said, I don't think your skin's gonna like that much. It's too
Like doing
hot.
all the things you shouldn't.
Could you do a hot tub instead? Yeah, right. So a lot of the things he just didn't realize, right? So there's little things he took away from it, and he started to learn. His factors were definitely more environmental, and then he cut back a little bit what he was doing. But again, that's quite a few years ago. So
Mhm.
I couldn't tell you where he's at now because, of course, I don't own my business anymore. But yeah, it's just figuring and monitoring, and they need to step it up. I mean, your clients need to do things. They can't expect you to be the miracle worker, just like they
Yeah.
think the doctors are the miracle workers. Like, well, this pill you gave me is not working anymore. It's like, well, what have you been doing? Like,
Yeah, and I think
you,
that's a
you
big
got to
part
be
of it, right?
accountable, right?
Yeah, you can take product, you can get treatments, but if there's other things like environmental stressors or
Yeah.
anything that you're consuming that is going to make it worse, then those other things you're doing, the products and the treatments are not going to be as effective. So it's, I think explanation and letting people know is such a huge part of it, right? Because it's, you're not just saying, here, take this, it'll help. You're also saying it'll help, but you should be also, and then
Mhm.
tempers their expectations, I think, as
Yeah.
well.
And it's also too, like, I mean, depending where you are living, like, I know for here in Alberta that with your doctor, you can get a referral to a dietitian for a consultation, right? So dietary foods, like you want an anti-inflammatory diet. So you want
Mhm.
to think of, and what does that mean? Well, you're not a dietitian too. I presume probably not as a professional in this industry. Maybe you are. Maybe you've taken other course. I've done holistic nutrition myself, but so I understand what inflammatory foods are versus anti-inflammatory. So if you just think like berries, like we talk about how good they are for you, your omega-3s, you think of what the doctor's recommending as well, right? Vitamin D, omega-3s, things like that. I'm not saying that you prescribe them to your
Mhm.
clients, but
Mhm.
ask them, are you taking any multivitamins of any sort? Has your doctor ever told you to do it? Maybe discuss this with your doctor. What are some things you can recommend? So you want to stay within your scope of practice without prescribing something to them. But I mean, we talked about mushrooms. They're so good, right?
Yeah.
Vitamin D, vitamin D is in there, really rich as well, right? So, but there's also, turmeric is supposed to be amazing.
Mm.
I understand that, that's a little bit different. That takes time to get into the system, I believe. And before you start to notice, it's not one of those things where you take something and within a couple of days you're feeling better. Like
Yeah.
turmeric is like you need to do it consistently and you'll see it in the long-term effect a few
Mhm.
months away, right? And then as simple as, instead of using maybe vegetable oil when you're cooking, can you switch it up to, extra virgin olive oil or something along those avocado oil if you're not allergic to avocados, like things like that, right? So I think if you help them, I mean, green tea, huge antioxidant, or white tea is even stronger antioxidants, like a powerhouse. So if you look at, is there something that they can switch out from their coffees, which is a stimulant? Can you change it to a tea or less coffee, right?
Yeah.
And switch in your tea. I actually, ironically, have started doing that. I'm like, I love a coffee in the morning, so I have one, and then I really want another because it's like, I really want another coffee. Just want it. So I switched it out to tea, to green tea. And it's just because I think it's the warmth that I'm looking for and that
Mhm.
drinking while I'm working,
Okay. Yeah.
and water just isn't it. It wasn't it this morning. I usually drink it first and then that's why I deserve 2 cups, I guess, in the morning. But so I always start with water, but it takes time. But again, you want to look at what are some things you could start maybe suggesting, and if you do want to target rosacea as a treatment protocol that you're going to become known for, then you need to do more. You
Mhm.
need to learn more and take courses on it and learn as much as you can and see what else, But yeah, and the biggest thing, like I said, is just narrow it down to think Kupros, broken capillaries, start there. What do you know? Because you've already been taught this part.
Mhm.
If you've taken facial technician course, esthetician, hopefully they talked about these things for you. You haven't, then you need to take a little bit more. But
Go review it if you
exactly,
forgot.
yeah, exactly. Or an easy one is reach out to your distributor. Who are you getting your products from? Who's the educator? Can you talk to them directly and find out, do you have protocols in place for each stage of
Yeah.
rosacea? What do they recommend? So, but basically, they look at things that are non-inflammatory when it comes to diet, right? So, is it got another one? Your veggies. You got to think about vegetables, but specifically like your broccolis and your cauliflower and your greens and that type of thing is what
Yeah.
you're looking more for than just tomatoes and carrots or celery. You know what I mean? Like you want the
Yeah.
cruciferous, cruciferous
Yeah.
vegetables. Yeah,
That's another word that's hard to spell.
that's another one. That's another one. Yeah, but yeah. So
Cool.
thinking that. Any recent diagnosis too, I should mention, high blood pressure, right? Is that a factor? Is it in
Oh,
control? Did they change their medication? So I'm thinking now outside the box of other things that have happened. Like, what are some other things that have happened? Like what changed in their body? So I talked about the endocrine system, but I kind of forgot about yeah, of course, the heart, the blood pressure.
yeah. Again, I think it's that curiosity, like just ask and ask, especially if you're, you know, getting invested in helping the client with their concern.
Right.
And if you want that to be your thing, then I
Yeah. And I think
think
that's
I think you've given them a lot of good tips But another one I think you mentioned is just like that maybe taking another course or something where you're specialized, like something very specific, because that continued education, not maybe it's going to be a review, but it's sometimes good reminder. If you've been
Mhm.
in the industry for a while, maybe you need a refresh.
Well, in
Um,
fairness, they're learning more, right?
exactly. The new
If you
things
look
are
at
coming up.
science,
Yeah,
how much have they discovered just in the last 2 years
exactly. Yeah,
when you took your course 5 years ago, right? Like,
totally.
especially if you're dealing with the body and skincare, yes,
Yeah.
it's not a lash lift,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's nothing against that, but right, like, what do you need to know? Well, yes, you need to know about eye diseases and things like that, but when you're dealing with internal factors of your body, what comes out is your hair, skin, and nails. It's
Hmm.
always that. That's the old saying. What suffers from bad health? Hair, skin, and nails, because your
Yeah.
organs need it. So it's going to take everything from there, right, to make sure that
Absolutely.
everything else is running properly. So
It's
think
complicated.
about, what stage is it in that you think, and do a general, recap for yourself. So you
Hmm.
understand, what am I dealing with here? What can I do to treat the stage I'm in right now? Like with my client, I think this is the stage. Did they get the doctor prognosis? Like, do they know? Not prognosis, but diagnosis, pardon me. Right. And then foods, like, is there some general things like that you can do or refer them to
Mhm.
a
Yeah,
dietitian or a holistic nutritionist or whatever it may be to help them with some better choices. So it's kind
and
of
tracking
everything.
triggers.
Yes, knowing their triggers is a huge one, huge
Yeah,
one. Yeah, be
awesome.
interesting to hear if anyone is doing this already. Would love to bring you on and talk a little deeper about rosacea. If you're in that treatment room and you become, a little more specialized, I'll say, and that's what you're known for, like, please, 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 please come on.
Yeah, reach out, we're
Um,
always taking
yes,
guests.
yeah, I think it'd be great to help other people. There's room for everyone, right, in this industry, and I
Mhm.
think knowledge is power. So, for you and your clients.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Well, I think we've given our listeners lots to work with. We will be back next week. Thanks for listening to Beauty Babble.